The sharp, unforgivable crack of flesh against flesh echoed through the vaulted ballroom. It was a sound that should have been impossible. The music died mid-note. The air in the Silver City turned into a vacuum of suffocating silence. Elena didn't flinch. Her hand, marked by the faint, floral ink of her Mafia lineage, remained steady. She stared straight into the eyes of the massive Lycan King who had just tried to dismiss her like a common peasant. Duncan froze. The heavy, polished silver of his armor caught the chandelier light, but his legendary dominance had just been fractured by 5 slender human fingers. Around them, hundreds of supernatural nobles stood like statues. Breath hitched in a collective gasp. Guards gripped the hilts of their blades, their predatory instincts screaming for the blood of the woman who had dared the unthinkable. Before she was a scandal in a silk dress, Elena was a ghost. For 3 years she had ruled the soul-based syndicate from the shadows, her life measured in encrypted files and the cold, metallic click of a heavy semi-automatic. She was the queen of the shadows, inheriting a throne of glass and bone. She had proven to every doubting man in her cartel that her sharp jawline was as lethal as any blade, but power was a gilded cage. Every meal tested for cyanide, every night watched through thermal monitors. Stepping out tonight was supposed to be a rare breath of reckless humanity, a drink she didn't have to test for poison, a moment to just be Elena. She had chosen the neutral ground of the Silver City, wearing a black dress that felt like armor, not looking for trouble. She had simply been sitting at the bar, swirling amber liquid in her glass when the air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient pine. Duncan had materialized beside her. He didn't look at her. He looked down at her. "This place isn't safe for a human," he had murmured, his voice a low rumble of unearned authority. "You are out of your depth, little one. The exits are to the north. Use them before the moon rises." To him, she was a fragile porcelain doll. But Elena had stared down cartel executioners while men like him were still playing with shadows. She had set her glass down with a deliberate, lethal click. His warning wasn't a kindness. It was an insult. And the vibration of her response, a brutal, open-handed strike to the king's face, now hummed in the dead-silent ballroom. Elena's jaw was set in iron defiance. She braced for the retaliation. A blade, a blow, a death sentence. It never came. Instead, as Duncan slowly turned his face back to her, his pupils blew wide, devouring the gold of his irises. The fury melted into a terrifying metamorphosis. A low, resonant frequency tore from his chest. It wasn't a growl. It was a claim. The sound vibrated so deeply it shattered the crystal flutes on the nearby tables. "Mine," he breathed. The word hit Elena with the physical weight of a centuries-old prophecy. Panic ignited. The High Guard didn't move to arrest her, they moved to shield her. A wall of steel and fur formed around the human who had just committed treason. Iron shutters slammed over the arched windows with a deafening thud, sealing out the night. "Lockdown," a commander roared, his voice cracking. "The soul claim has been triggered. Seal the perimeter." Elena stood in the eye of the storm, her heart hammering against her ribs. She dealt in blood and contracts, but as Duncan's eyes locked onto hers, she realized with sinking dread. She had just signed a blood bond she couldn't break. They put her in the royal guest suite. In reality, it was a gilded cage, guarded by 4 massive Lycans whose muscles strained against their tunics. They looked at her as if a strong breeze might break her. They didn't see the woman who had dismantled the soul docks in a single night. Elena didn't pace. She observed. She timed the rhythmic thud of boots in the hall. She noted the blind spot in the archaic security camera. Stripping a wire from a high-end floor lamp, she shorted the electronic lock with the practiced ease of a career saboteur. The door hissed open. She didn't run. She flowed into the hallway, using the palace's own shadows against it. A guard rounded the corner, his nose twitching at a scent that didn't belong. Before his lungs could expand for a howl, Elena's hand clamped over his mouth. The cold tip of a stolen letter opener pressed tight against the soft pulse point beneath his jaw. "Don't," she whispered. Her voice was ice. "I've escaped better men than you in heels higher than these." By the time his backup arrived, the hall was empty. The Mafia Queen was already deep within the palace's restricted vents. Ancient law was about to meet modern warfare. She didn't make it far before the air thickened. In the king's private study, Duncan moved with the silent, terrifying lethality of a landslide. Before she could react, he had her pinned against a mahogany bookshelf. His hand didn't wrap around her throat. Instead, his bare thumb brushed the dark, ornamental ink wrapping her neck. "I thought it was a mark of your rebellion," he growled. His golden eyes flickered with a dangerous, ancient light. "A modern trophy for a mafia brat." Elena held his gaze. The heat of his skin seared hers, but her jaw remained unyielding. "It's a family tradition, Duncan. We don't just survive, we leave a mark." His touch turned clinical, tracing the hidden geometry within the floral petals. Suddenly, his breath hitched. It wasn't just a pattern. It was the chrysanthemum shield, the long-lost sigil of the black-eyed hunters. This woman wasn't just a disruptive human. She was the descendant of the exact clan that had slaughtered his kind during the Great Lunar Purge. The Mafia Queen was carrying the bloodline of wolf slayers. The bond between them wasn't just a miracle. It was a divine, twisted irony that threatened to tear his kingdom apart. But before the weight of that truth could settle, the moonlight over the royal garden shattered. A silenced bullet cracked through the window, decimating a stone fountain. Elena didn't scream. She dropped. Years of street war instincts took over. She rolled gracefully behind a marble plinth, her hand flashing to the slit of her black silk dress. She pulled a compact 9 from a hidden thigh holster. Beside her, Duncan was a blur of violence. He didn't fully shift, but his claws elongated. His eyes glowed with predatory fire. "Rogue pack," he snarled, catching the metallic scent of wet fur and betrayal. "And my rivals from the Viper Syndicate," Elena countered. She spotted the red laser dots dancing frantically across the rose bushes. "They've made a pact." The first time, the king and the Mafia Queen fought as one. It was a brutal, breathtaking ballet of modern ballistics and ancient fury. Elena provided cover fire, her shots rhythmic and devastatingly clinical. Duncan tore through the flanks of the rogue wolves, a force of primal destruction. They moved in a synchronized heat, her lead clearing the path for his steel. As the final assassin fell, the garden went dead silent. Elena stood among the ruined petals, her chest heaving, thin smoke curling from her barrel. Duncan turned to her. His face was splattered with blood that wasn't his. In that fleeting, breathless second, the bond between them didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a weapon, but the kingdom would not allow it. The High Council's chamber felt like a cathedral of cold stone and ancient prejudice. 12 elders sat cloaked in the shadows, their eyes glowing like dying embers as they stared down at Elena. Duncan stood firmly at her side, his heavy hand resting on her shoulder, a proprietary weight, a shield. But even a king's favor could not silence the old laws. "A human mate is a mutation," the eldest counselor rasped. His voice sounded like grinding gravel. "But a hunter's seed in the royal bed. That is an act of war." Duncan's grip tightened. A low growl vibrated through Elena's frame. "She is my mate by the moon's own hand. You will not touch her." "Then let the moon decide," the elder countered, leaning forward into the pale light. "If she is truly the queen of the prophecy, she will survive the trial of the crescent moon. If she is merely a mafia pretender, the woods will keep her bones." Felt the shift in the room, the metallic tang of impending blood. They expected her to tremble, to plead for the king's mercy. Instead, she stepped out from beneath Duncan's shadow. She tilted her chin, her face a mask of lethal, modern defiance. "I've survived the streets of Seoul," she said, her voice slicing cleanly through the ancient air. "Your woods don't scare me." The ancient pines of the lunar reach were supposed to be her graveyard, but to a woman raised in the concrete labyrinth of the underworld, the forest was just another grid, another chessboard. The Lycan executioners moved with arrogant, terrifying speed. Their heavy paws thumped against the damp earth, closing in for the kill. They expected to find a panicked rabbit. They found a ghost with a vendetta. Elena didn't run. She moved with lethal simplicity, using the terrain as her silent partner. She rigged a weighted branch, triggered by a discarded silk ribbon from her dress. It swung down with bone-shattering force, taking out the lead wolf's chest. Before the others could even howl, she was gone. A shadow among shadows, she had no silver. But she had physics, and she had the ruthless ingenuity of a cartel boss. Stripping high-tensile wire she had salvaged from the palace walls, she wove a tripline that sent the second massive hunter plunging blindly into a concealed ravine. When the final executioner finally cornered her, she wasn't hiding. She was standing perfectly still in a moonlit clearing, the pale light catching the floral ink on her neck. The beast lunged. Elena didn't flinch. She pivoted with a dancer's grace, leading his massive momentum directly into the heavy timber deadfall she'd spent the last hour rigging. The logs crashed down, pinning the beast to the dirt. Elena walked over and looked down at him. Her expression was one of cold, absolute dominance. This trial wasn't a hunt anymore. It was a hostile takeover. The silence that greeted Elena as she stepped out of the tree line was entirely different from the shock in the ballroom. This was the heavy, breathless silence of a kingdom witnessing the impossible. Her black dress was torn. Her pale skin was smeared with dirt and dried blood. But as she walked toward the High Council, her pace was slow, deliberate, the stride of a conqueror. She didn't wait for their judgment. She walked straight to the center of the dais, her hand coming up to rest lightly on the hunter's ink at her neck. "Moon didn't take me," she said, her voice dropping like a cool blade. "And neither will you." Then Duncan moved. His heavy armor clanked against the stone floor. To the absolute horror of the traditionalists, the Alpha King did not command her to heal. He stopped before her, lowered his massive frame, and slowly sank to one knee. He bowed his head to the human woman who had dared to strike him. The gesture hit the hall like a shockwave. One by one, guards, nobles, and elders followed suit. A wave of silver, fur, and steel crashed to the floor. Elena reached down. Her fingers tangled in Duncan's dark hair, gently forcing his gaze up to meet hers. She wasn't just a mate. She was the new underworld order. Outside, the wolf banners began to rise in the wind, but everyone in that room knew the truth. It was the Mafia Queen who truly held the throne.